Imagine living your whole life in isolation and torment, waking up every night to painful memories you can never forget, and hearing the laughter of a neighbor who caused your wounds every day. Jack was a simple man, living on the fringes of life, but he carried a suppressed anger for years, until Christmas night arrived, which was supposed to be filled with joy. But for Jack, it marked the beginning of a chilling story that changed everything. Want to know what happened? Stay with me to hear one of the darkest tales you'll ever hear in your life. It was 1 a.m. The chilling silence of the night was overwhelming. God, I don't know what's worse. This cursed quiet that feels like the calm before an attack, or the aching pain in my leg that stabs me harder with every icy gust of wind, muttered Jack to himself as he tossed and turned in bed. Sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford ever since the horrors of the Vietnam War scarred his mind and body. Jack had lost not just his youth to that endless conflict, but also his parents during his time away, leaving him with no one and nothing but a broken body and shattered dreams. The injuries to his leg earned him the cruel nickname Crippled Jack and made work nearly impossible. On top of that, the psychological trauma made him withdraw completely. He had no friends, no family, and no love, just the dimly lit house he inherited and his father's old snowplow, which he used only to clear his driveway. Jack rarely ventured outside, only when absolutely necessary, like to buy groceries. His reclusive nature and limping gait made him a target for the neighborhood's children, who loved throwing snowballs at him from a distance. One day, as Jack trudged back from the store carrying a few bags of food, he was struck by a snowball. He stopped and glared at the group of giggling kids. One boy, perhaps feeling guilty, murmured an apology, but as Jack resumed walking, he overheard the hushed laughter and whispers behind him. "That's Crippled Jack. Look how slow he is." Another barrage of snowballs followed, and this time Jack's groceries scattered onto the icy street. He stood frozen, not picking anything up, until a man's voice shouted from a nearby house. "Hey, cut it out, kids!" Jack turned to see the man stepping onto the porch. His heart sank. It was David. David had been Jack's childhood bully, the one who mocked him relentlessly in school. Seeing him again, now an adult with children of his own, brought back a flood of painful memories. "Is that you, Jack?" "Fat Jack from school," David called out with a smirk. Jack didn't reply. He fled to his house, slamming the door behind him. From behind the safety of the door, he could still hear David laughing and telling the children, "That's Crippled Jack. He's always been weird." Jack spent that evening trembling with anger and humiliation. The groceries he left behind no longer mattered. He sat in his dark kitchen, eating whatever scraps he could find. The scars of the war were nothing compared to the wounds David had just reopened. As Christmas approached, the neighborhood transformed. Houses were adorned with lights, ornaments, and glowing Santa Claus figures. Jack's house, however, remained dark and lifeless. The festive cheer outside only amplified his sense of isolation. One evening, while Jack was driving his father's old snowplow down the icy streets, he accidentally hit the back of David's car, triggering its alarm. Jack froze, gripping the steering wheel tightly, as David stormed out of his house with his children in tow. "What the hell did you do, you idiot?" David yelled. "Still as clumsy as ever, huh? Always a screw-up, just like in school." One of David's children added, "Dad, he's not just clumsy, he's crippled and stupid." The laughter that followed pushed Jack over the edge. He fled home, but his mind was a whirlwind of rage and despair. Sitting alone in his dimly lit house, he stared at the snowplow in his garage. Memories of the war, the violence, the blood, the screams, merged with the humiliation of the present. His grip tightened on the handle of his father's old axe. That night, Christmas Eve, Jack stood at his bedroom window, staring at the glowing lights of David's house. "Why does he get to have it all?" he whispered. Why him and not me? The hours dragged on, and when the lights in David's house finally went out, Jack made his move. The axe felt heavy in his hands, but he didn't notice the weight. He hobbled across the snow-covered yard, his limp barely slowing him down. Breaking into David's house was easier than he had expected. Inside, he moved like a shadow, his breath visible in the cold air. David's lifeless body was the first to hit the floor, the axe buried deep in his chest. Jack's anger fueled him as he moved through the house, ensuring no one was left alive. The wife, the children, all were silenced in a brutal, bloody rampage. When it was over, Jack stood amidst the carnage, panting heavily. For the first time in years, he felt alive. But that feeling was fleeting. The horrifying reality of what he had done crashed down on him like an avalanche. He fled the scene, climbing into his snowplow and disappearing into the frozen night. The next morning, one of David's children's friends came by to pick him up for an outing. When no one answered the door, the boy peered through a window and saw the blood-stained walls. Terrified, he ran home to tell his parents, who immediately called the police. By the time authorities arrived, Jack was long gone. His house was empty, and the snowplow was found abandoned on a nearby highway, its interior stained with blood. The axe was missing, and footprints led into the dense frozen forest. Despite an extensive search, Jack was never found. Over time, his story became a local legend. Parents warned their children to behave during the holiday season, whispering tales of Crippled Jack, the ghostly figure who roamed the snowy woods, seeking revenge on those who mocked him. To this day, on Christmas Eve, some say you can still hear the rumble of his snowplow in the distance, followed by the faint sound of an axe slicing through the icy wind. As the story reaches its chilling conclusion, we're left to ponder. What would you have done if you were in Jack's shoes? How would you have faced the darkness that consumed him? Until next time, keep your lights on and your mind in the coffin.